In the quiet shadows of America's past, thousands of young men once stood on the brink of a conflict that would reshape a nation forever. Their names have faded, their stories have blurred, and for more than 160 years, their faces have remained frozen in brittle, black and white photographs, distant echoes of a war long ended. But today, we bring them back. Through careful restoration, advanced colorization, and a deep respect for the past, these portraits reveal the real men behind the Confederate uniform. Sons, brothers, farmers, scholars, and soldiers who lived through one of the most turbulent chapters in American history. This is Colorized Civil War history.
Lieutenant Colonel Roger Preston Chew, 1843 to 1921, a famous Confederate artillery commander known for organizing the first horse artillery unit in the Civil War, serving under General Turner Ashby, and later becoming a West Virginia businessman and legislator. While not typically titled Lieutenant Colonel, his fame stems from his artillery leadership as captain and colonel, making him a significant historical figure. M.G. Fitzhugh Lee and aide Cap Charles Minnegerode. At daybreak on April 9, 1865, about a half-mile west of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, Major General Fitzhugh Lee's cavalrymen formed for what would be their last charge. They attacked around sunrise and drove back aggressive Yankee horse soldiers. As musket balls whistled about Lee and his staff, one bullet ripped into the upper body of the young lieutenant at his side, Charlie Minnegerode, his favorite aide-de-camp. As Minnegerode lay writhing on the ground with blood oozing through the small round hole in his uniform coat, more enemy units arrived on the scene and advanced rapidly towards their position. Lee's surgeon hastily scribbled a note with Charlie's name and rank and pinned it to his jacket, and the group abandoned the grievously wounded aide to his fate. The general and his surviving staff, some with tears welling in their eyes, rode away to the sound of Charlie groaning in pain and begging to be put out of his misery. Charlie had joined the war effort in 1861 at age 15 as a clerk at the Richmond Arsenal. During his time there, he rose to chief clerk and confidential secretary to Major Briscoe G. Baldwin, who later served as Gen. Robert E. Lee's chief of ordnance. Baldwin noted, "I have never known a young man of more precocious or better balanced mind, or one of more noble traits of character. He is intelligent, industrious, and accurate." The major also discovered Charlie's natural abilities as a soldier, stating in late 1862, "He was with me in 2 of the great battles around Richmond, and manifested great coolness and courage under a hot fire." Minnegerode's father, Charles Sr., a German-born minister who preached from his pulpit in Richmond's St. Paul's Episcopal Church to President Jefferson Davis, General Robert E. Lee, and other dignitaries, worried that his boy was too young to fight a man's war. But the Reverend could not find it in my heart to forbid his son's service, especially after receiving glowing reports of his actions. The young man joined the military family of Fitz Lee and endeared himself to all with his friendly disposition. Lee took a liking to him, and Charlie returned his commander's kindness with loyalty. Over the next 3 years, according to the general, Charlie passed unharmed through the many battles fought by the 2 principal armies in this state, for an impetuous spirit often carried him where the fire was hottest. Charlie's wound-free battle record ended at Appomattox. The bullet that struck him passed through his upper body. After Lee and his staff left him where he fell, Charlie pulled himself together and started to write a farewell letter to his mother. About this time, Federal soldiers captured and carried him to a field hospital. He miraculously survived and later posed for his portrait wearing his blood-stained uniform coat. Charlie remained a loyal and devoted friend to Fitz Lee after the war. In 1881, both veterans attended the New Orleans dedication of a monument honoring the Louisiana Division of the Army of Northern Virginia. An observer noted that Charlie took naturally to his old vocation in serving General Lee. At this time, Charlie lived in New Orleans, where he arrived a year earlier, armed with introductions to top traders and manufacturers provided by former President Jefferson Davis. Charlie and a brother established a business. Charlie later returned to Virginia. his business fell into decline and financial troubles plagued him. On the afternoon of January 25, 1888, in his home in Alexandria, Virginia, he placed the muzzle of a pistol just above his right ear and pulled the trigger. He died soon after, at age 42. His wife and 8 children survived him. On the night of his death, the bullet that struck him down at Appomattox Courthouse was found in his pocket. He had carried it as a talisman after the war.
Company A, 53rd Virginia Artillery. Company G, Cumberland Light Dragoons, 3rd Virginia Cavalry. Charles Benjamin Palmore. This is a 1/4 plate ambrotype, early war image of ornately uniformed Charles Benjamin Palmore, who was in Company G of Virginia's Cumberland Light Dragoons. This company, along with 10 other companies, were organized and became a part of J.E.B. Stuart's 3rd Virginia Cavalry. Respiratory issues cut Palmore's cavalry service short, and he continued throughout the war serving in Company A, 53rd Virginia Artillery. Private Stanford Lee Jesse of Company A, 29th Virginia Infantry Regiment, in uniform with rifle and bowie knife. Rockbridge Rangers, Private James Lackey, 14th Regiment, Company C, 1st Virginia Cavalry. Captain George Riggs Gaither of K Company, 1st Virginia Cavalry. George Riggs Gaither, whose ancestors founded Gaithersburg, Maryland, is the subject of this ambrotype by Richmond-based Charles R. Reese, one of the best Civil War-era photographers in the South. As captain of a local militia unit, the Howard County Dragoons, Gaither led a group of landowners, many of whom owned slaves, and assisted with peacekeeping in Baltimore during riots in 1861. When pressed to swear allegiance to the United States, most refused, gathered their weapons, rode to Leesburg, Virginia, and joined the Confederate Army. Gaither was captured at Manassas Junction on August 27, 1862, later exchanged and sent to Europe the next year on a mission for the Confederate government. Following the war, he became a cotton trader. Company B, 5th Virginia Cavalry, David and Simmons Williams. Captain Robert Emmett Robinson of Petersburg Light Dragoons, later assigned to Company D, 5th Virginia Cavalry Regiment, in uniform with Virginia State Seal sword belt plate and sword. The New York Times, October 13, 1919. Richard B. Tonstall dies. Former lawyer in this city, fought as schoolboy in Civil War. Richard Baylor Tonstall, who practiced law in this city from 1871 to 1883, died in Norfolk, Virginia on Saturday at the age of 71. Since returning to his native city, he had been an active member of the bar in Norfolk until his retirement in 1907. His wife, who died in 1905, was Miss Isabel Heiser of this city. As a student of the Virginia Military Institute in May 1864, Mr. Tunstall, with his fellow cadets, fought in the Battle of New Market under General Breckinridge. He was a director of the Norfolk Railway and Light Company and an elector on the Palmer and Buckner ticket in 1896. In 1912 to 1913, he was Chancellor of the Diocese of Southern Virginia. In the rolling countryside of northern Virginia's northern neck, long before the Civil War scarred its fields, a child was born who would witness every stage of America's greatest crisis. His name was Richard Lee Tuberville Beale, a soldier, a lawyer, a politician, and a chronicler of the world he knew. Today, through restored photographs and vivid accounts, we revisit the life of a man shaped by duty, conflict, and the turbulent heart of a divided nation. Richard L. T. Beale was born on May 22, 1819 in Westmoreland County, Virginia, a place steeped in tradition and old family ties. He grew up surrounded by the rhythms of rural life, the distant call of the Potomac River, the work of the fields, and a culture where honor and family legacy carried immense weight.
Beale was intelligent and curious from a young age. He pursued higher education at the University of Virginia and then studied law, preparing for a quiet professional life. In the years before the war, he served his community as an attorney and even as a representative in the U.S. Congress, long before those same halls would be divided by secession. When the first shots were fired in 1861, Virginia found itself at the center of the conflict. Thousands of Virginians enlisted, some out of loyalty to their state, others out of pressure, fear, or community expectation. Beale was among them. He set aside his political ambitions and joined the Confederate Cavalry, eventually becoming a prominent officer in the 9th Virginia Cavalry. It was a turning point in his life. What had once been a world of debates and legal arguments was now a world of mud, dust, fear, and survival. Cavalry life was demanding, far removed from the romantic image it's often given. Beale and his men carried out scouting missions through thick forests, rode for miles with little sleep, and engaged in sudden clashes that could erupt and end within minutes. Supplies were scarce, horses grew thin, days blurred into nights. Yet Beale earned a reputation for steady leadership. He was calm under pressure, observant, and thoughtful. His written accounts describe not only the movement of armies, but the faces of the young men beside him, many of them Virginians who never imagined the reality of war until it was upon them. As the war dragged on, the fighting in Virginia became more destructive. Beale's unit found itself constantly in motion, skirmishing with Union forces, protecting supply routes, gathering intelligence, and facing the exhaustion that came with years of conflict. He saw firsthand the toll the war took on families. Homes destroyed, farms burned, communities split apart. The soldiers, whether Union or Confederate, bore not only the weight of battle, but the weight of the nation's future on their shoulders. Beale's writings from this period carry a mixture of resolve and sorrow. He believed deeply in defending his state, yet he could not escape witnessing the suffering that engulfed Virginia. By 1864 to 1865, the Confederate cavalry, once swift and formidable, struggled against overwhelming odds. Supplies dwindled. Horses died or grew too weak to ride. The end was approaching, and Beale, like many officers, knew it. When the Confederate forces finally collapsed, Beale surrendered along with thousands of other Virginia soldiers. The war was over, but the work of rebuilding was just begun. After 4 years of war, Beale returned to the civilian world, a world forever transformed. He resumed his law practice, served again in Congress, and became a key figure in documenting the history of the 9th Virginia Cavalry. His memoirs provide one of the most detailed accounts left by any Confederate officer, not just chronicles of battles, but reflections on the people, the land, and the enormous cost of the conflict. Through his writing, Beale gave future generations a window into the experiences of Virginia's soldiers, their motivations, their hardships, their fears, and their humanity. Richard Beale lived until 1893, carrying with him memories of a war that shaped him, his home, and the nation. His story is not simple, nor is it free of the complexities that define the Civil War, but it stands as an important chapter, a life that reflects the choices, challenges, and consequences faced by so many Virginians. Today, as we restore the faces of the past and bring them to life through color and motion, we remember individuals like Beale not as distant figures, but as real people who lived, struggled, believed, and endured in an era that tested the very soul of America.
9th Virginia Cavalry, Colonel William Henry Fitzhugh Rooney Lee. In the forests, river valleys, and open fields of Virginia, a cavalry regiment rode through some of the most intense fighting of the American Civil War. These men formed the 9th Virginia Cavalry, scouts, raiders, couriers, and fighters who moved constantly across the shifting front lines of the war. and among their most notable commanders was a man whose name carried enormous weight, William Henry Fitzhugh Rooney Lee, the son of Robert E. Lee. This is their story, a story of hardship, strategy, and survival in a war that tore Virginia apart. The 9th Virginia Cavalry was created in 1861, assembled from local companies of horsemen. Many of these men already knew one another from the small towns and country roads of the Northern Neck. They were farmers, clerks, blacksmiths, and young men barely into adulthood. Their world changed seemingly overnight, and they entered the cavalry not as professional soldiers, but as Virginians, answering a call they believed their communities expected of them. Among the officers shaping this new regiment was William Henry Fitzhugh Rooney Lee. Born in 1837, he was the second son of Robert E. Lee, but those who served with him learned quickly that he was not merely the general's son. Rooney had attended Harvard, served in the U.S. Army, and was known as an excellent horseman. When Virginia seceded, he resigned his U.S. commission and offered his service to his home state. Soon he was helping train, organize, and lead the men who would become the 9th Virginia Cavalry. The early months of the war were harsh and unpredictable. The regiment learned quickly what cavalry life truly meant: long days in the saddle, sleepless nights on picket duty, and constant movement through the forests and farmlands of Virginia. Under the command of J.E.B. Stuart, they became part of a cavalry corps famous for its daring maneuvers. But the glamour often associated with cavalry service was far from the truth. Mud, hunger, fatigue, and danger became a daily existence. Rooney Lee demonstrated calm leadership in these demanding conditions. He gained respect not through theatrics, but through discipline, horsemanship, and steady judgment. The 9th Virginia Cavalry soon became the eyes and ears of the Confederate Army, scouting enemy positions, protecting the flanks of larger forces, and striking quickly when opportunities appeared. Their work was difficult and often deadly. At any moment, a simple patrol could turn into a fierce skirmish or an ambush in the dark woods. One of the regiment's defining moments came at Brandy Station on June 9, 1863, the largest cavalry battle ever fought in North America. Union cavalry launched a massive, unexpected attack on Confederate positions. The fields erupted in chaos, sabers flashing, horses rearing, gunfire echoing across the hills. The 9th Virginia Cavalry found itself at the center of the storm. During the fighting, Rooney Lee was seriously wounded. Despite the pain, he tried to continue leading his men until he could no longer remain upright. Days later, still recovering, he was captured by Union troops. His absence struck a hard blow to his family and the men he commanded. Rooney spent nearly a year as a prisoner of war. During his captivity, the world around him changed dramatically. Union raids tore through parts of Virginia. Supplies grew scarce. The Confederate armies struggled to match the growing strength of their opponents. The 9th Virginia Cavalry continued to operate without him, but morale suffered. They had lost one of their most dependable officers. In 1864, Rooney Lee was exchanged and returned to Confederate service. But the war he came back to was very different. The cavalry, once swift and powerful, was now worn down, exhausted, and short on horses and equipment. Even so, Rooney resumed command and did what he could in the final grinding year of the conflict. The 9th Virginia Cavalry performed screening maneuvers, protected retreating forces, and fought in desperate delaying actions as the Confederate defense collapsed. By 1865,
the regiment followed the Army of Northern Virginia toward its final destination, Appomattox Courthouse. The war ended soon after, and the surviving members of the 9th Virginia Cavalry began the long and difficult process of returning home to a devastated Virginia. For Rooney Lee, life after the war meant rebuilding both family and purpose. He turned to farming and eventually returned to public service, serving in the Virginia House of Delegates and later in the U.S. Congress. He lived the remainder of his life away from military command, reflecting the broader journey of many former soldiers who transitioned back into civilian roles in a changed nation. He died in 1891 at the age of 54. The legacy of the 9th Virginia Cavalry is one woven from thousands of individual stories. Stories of sacrifice, endurance, fear, and duty. Their experiences reflect the complicated and often painful history of Virginia during the Civil War. Through restored images and preserved memories, we can see them not as distant figures in faded photographs, but as real people navigating the upheaval of their time. And in the center of that story stands Rooney Lee, young officer, cavalry commander, prisoner, and survivor, whose life mirrors the turbulent journey of Virginia itself during those defining years.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If this history moved you, inspired you, or made you see the Civil War era in a new way, consider supporting the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video.